It was almost 8 at night when Beatrice heard the crying. It wasn't just any kind of crying. It was the kind that tightens the chest of any mother, of any woman who has ever held a child. The cry of someone who is truly afraid. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, the bag of cleaning supplies weighing on her shoulder and her feet aching inside her worn-out sneakers, and looked around. There, leaning against a concrete pillar at the exit of the Paulista Avenue subway, were two little girls. Small, maybe 5 years old, wearing expensive clothes and with tear-streaked faces, clinging to each other as if the entire world had disappeared around them. Beatrice stood still for a few seconds. The exhaustion of the day weighed on her in a very real way. She had cleaned 4 floors of an office since 6 in the morning, on her knees, with strong-smelling chemicals that still lingered in her throat. She had a bus to catch, dinner to make, laundry to hang. She had an entire life waiting for her 40 minutes away. But her feet moved on their own. "Hey." She crouched down to the girl's height, carefully, like someone approaching an injured bird. "What happened? Are you okay?" The one on the left looked up first. Dark eyes, very big, filled with tears. The other kept her face buried in her sister's shoulder. "We got lost," said the first, her voice catching. "We were with Rodrigo, but he disappeared, and we don't know where to go." "Is Rodrigo your dad?" "No." The girl shook her head. "The driver." Beatrice took a deep breath. She looked around. A stream of people passing by, no one paying attention, everyone in their own world. She took her phone out of her pocket, the screen cracked, battery at 20%, and asked if they had their father's number or anyone in the family. The two looked at each other and shook their heads at the same time, with that strange synchronicity only twins have. "It's okay," Beatrice said, even without knowing if it was true. "It's okay. Do you know your names?" "Isadora," said the first. "Letitia," said the second, finally lifting her face. "I'm Beatrice, and I'm not going anywhere until we find someone from your family. Okay?" She bought 2 snacks from a cart nearby, because the girls were hungry. She could tell by the way their eyes went straight to the food, that look that doesn't lie. While they ate, Beatrice tried calling the subway lost, and found, anything that made sense. The battery kept dropping. 18%. 15. It was Isadora who remembered a detail. Their father's name was Renato, and his office was in a mirrored building nearby. She was sure because she recognized the building when they drove by. Beatrice looked in the direction the girl pointed and recognized the building. She had cleaned that building 2 years before. They went on foot, each girl holding one of her hands. Beatrice didn't even fully process what she was doing. She just knew she couldn't leave 2 children alone on a sidewalk in Sao Paulo at night. It wasn't a matter of heroism. It was a matter of not being able to do otherwise. The lobby security guard looked at them with suspicion, especially at Beatrice, with her work uniform and cleaning bag. She explained the situation calmly, without lowering herself, without apologizing for existing. She asked them to inform Mr. Renato that his daughters were there. While they waited, Letitia took Beatrice's hand and didn't let go. 5 minutes later, the elevator opened. The man who stepped out was tall, in a dark suit, with the closed-off expression of someone in the middle of something important. But when he saw the girls, something in him broke, visibly like glass, and he went to them with steps that almost stumbled. The girls ran. But before reaching their father, Isadora turned to Beatrice and said, loudly, without ceremony, with the absolute naturalness of someone who doesn't know the weight of what she's saying, "Thank you, Mommy." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. But Beatrice felt every one of them. Renato raised his eyes to her for the first time, and there was something in that look that she couldn't name. Surprise, yes, but also something else, something deeper. If you are enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell in the comments what you thought and which city or country you're watching from. This helps a lot. Renato was not a man of many words. Anyone who knew him was aware of that. His partners knew it. His assistant knew it, and Katerina, his fiancée, knew it better than anyone, and had been using his silence to her advantage for almost 2 years. That night, however, he spoke. "Can you give me your contact?" he asked, still crouched near his daughters, his eyes moving from Isadora to Lydia and back to Beatrice. "I would like to thank you properly." "There's no need to thank me," she replied, and it was true. "There is." He said it in a way that wasn't arrogance. It was a simple statement, almost shy. "Please." She wrote her number on a piece of paper he took from his own pocket. An actual piece of paper, not his phone. She found that strange, and at the same time felt it said something about him, though she wasn't sure exactly what. She picked up her bag, said goodbye to the girls, and left without looking back, because if she did, she would feel sorry for those two again. On the bus, with her head resting against the window, Beatrice thought that would be the end of it. An exchange number, a formal thank you, maybe a transfer via Pix that she wouldn't even know how to refuse. Rich people solved everything with money. It wasn't criticism, it was just how things worked. 3 days later, the phone rang. It wasn't Renato. It was a woman with a well-placed voice and the diction of someone who had taken public speaking classes. She said she was Mr. Renato Cavalcante's assistant, and that he would like to make a professional offer. Beatrice stayed quiet for a moment. The word offer could mean many things, and the woman continued. He was looking for a trustworthy nanny for the twins, with live-in accommodation, above market salary, and the girls had personally asked for it to be her. Beatrice hung up. She stared at the ceiling of the small room she shared with her cousin. She thought about the overdue electricity bill. She thought about the knee that hurt every time she knelt to clean. She thought about Isadora and Lydia clinging to each other by that concrete pillar. She called back the next day and said yes. Renato's house was in a gated community in Higienopolis. It wasn't the kind of house that appears in magazines. It was large, yes, but it had a silence inside that weighed heavily. Few paintings on the walls. No children's mess in the hallways. Everything in place, everything correct, everything lifeless. The girls ran to Beatrice when she arrived with her suitcase. Lydia clung to her waist, as if afraid she would leave. Isadora stayed serious, observing, and then said, "Are you going to sleep here every night?" "Every night," Beatrice confirmed. Isadora nodded, satisfied, as if she had just solved an old problem. It was on the third day that Beatrice met Katerina. She came down the stairs in a dark green dress, impeccable hair, perfume that arrived before she did. She was beautiful in the way some people are beautiful, fully aware of it, using it as a tool. She looked Beatrice up and down with surgical speed and smiled the way one smiles at someone who poses no threat. "Oh, you're the new nanny." It wasn't a question. Renato told me. What a curious story, right? Found the girls on the street. "I didn't find them," Beatrice said calmly. "They were lost, and I stayed with them until their father showed up." Katerina blinked. She wasn't expecting a response. "Of course," she said, still smiling. "That's what I said." It wasn't. But Beatrice let it go. In those first weeks, Katerina appeared at the house with a frequency that seemed calculated. Always when Renato was there. Never for long. Just enough to make her presence known, to sit at the table, to touch his arm with a familiarity that said he's mine without needing words. With the girls, she was cordial, the way one is cordial with a boyfriend's children when still in the phase of trying to impress the father. But there were moments when that cordiality slipped. One afternoon, Beatrice was in the kitchen helping Isadora with a drawing when she heard Katerina say on the phone, outside, without lowering her voice, "It's a temporary situation, Mom. Renato just feels sorry for her. You know him. He's always been like that. He feels sorry for people with no prospects. When we get married, that will change." Isadora looked up from her drawing and looked at Beatrice. Beatrice said nothing. She picked up a colored pencil and chose blue. But she stored those words in a place inside her where important things wait. Beatrice was not the kind of person who made elaborate plans. Her life had always been handled day by day, through improvisation, through adaptation. But there was one thing she had learned early, growing up in the neighborhood where she grew up, with the mother she had. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes, silence is the most intelligent move there is. So she observed. She watched Renato come home late every day, greet his daughters with a quick hug, and return his phone before sitting down. She watched Isadora look at him expecting more, and not get more, and lower her eyes with that small resignation that shouldn't exist in a 5-year-old child. She watched Lydia stop talking when her father entered the room, as if she knew that the moment of lightness had ended. And she watched Katerina, with doubled attention. The woman had a specific talent. She knew exactly what to say in front of Renato. In front of him, she was sweet with the girls, interested, present. She asked about school, about drawings, pretended to read the stories Isadora showed her. But when he left the room, the interest disappeared with him. There was no explicit cruelty. It was worse than that. It was total indifference, the kind a child feels but cannot name. Beatrice saw it. The girls felt it. Renato did not notice. On a Wednesday morning, while taking the twins to the park, Lydia asked out of nowhere, "Is Katerina going to be our mother?" Beatrice held both their hands more firmly and answered carefully, "Why are you asking that?" Because she said it. Lydia said it simply, without drama. She said that when she marries Daddy, she's going to organize our routine her way. Isadora added, in a low voice, "And that nanny is something for little kids." Beatrice stayed silent for a few steps. The sun hit the sidewalk hard. A pigeon crossed their path. "Do you like how things are now?" she asked. Both answered at the same time, without hesitation. "Yes." Then, Beatrice said, "We take care of what is good." She didn't promise anything beyond that, but it was enough. That same week, she began to do something that seemed small and wasn't. Every night, after dinner, she called Renato to the table before he disappeared into his office. Not directly. She used the girls as a bridge. "Your father needs to see this," she would say, showing the day's drawing. Or, "Tell Daddy what happened at the park today." At first, he participated out of obligation. He sat, listened, smiled at the right moments, and left as soon as he could. But children have a power that no adult can pretend to ignore for long. On Thursday of that week, Isadora held her father's face with both hands. That gesture she had learned from Beatrice, of holding the face of someone you want to be heard by, and said, "Daddy, did you know that Beatrice taught us how to make bread?" Renato looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Beatrice. There was something different in that look, no longer the distant evaluation of the first day. It was curiosity, almost vulnerability. "I didn't know," he said. "Do you want to learn?" Isadora asked. And Renato, the man who ran a company of 300 employees and didn't know how to say no to his 5-year-old daughter, said, "I do." They made bread that night. Flour everywhere. Lydia with dough in her hair. Renato with the expression of someone doing something completely outside his element and not quite sure how to feel about it. Beatrice stood beside them, instructing, laughing when she needed to laugh, serious when she needed to be serious. At some point, Renato looked at her over his daughters' heads and said, quietly, almost unintentionally, "Thank you. Truly." She nodded. She didn't turn it into something bigger than it was. But she kept it. 2 days later, an envelope was left on the kitchen table. Beatrice opened it without understanding. Inside there was a printed screenshot, a message conversation between Katerina and someone unidentified. The conversation was recent, and what was written there changed everything Beatrice thought she understood about that house. She didn't know who had left the envelope, but she knew that from that moment on, something was about to break. The envelope stayed in the drawer for 3 days. Beatrice was not impulsive. She never had been. She had learned early on that acting in the heat of the moment was a privilege of those who could make mistakes without consequences, and she had never been that person. So she folded the paper, put it away, and waited. She watched Katerina arrive on Friday with a box of expensive sweets and a wide smile. Listened to her talk to Renato about the wedding date, about the apartment they wanted to renovate, about the future she was drawing with the precision of someone who already considered the present settled. Beatrice served dinner, washed the dishes, put the girls to bed, and waited. What was in the screenshot was simple and devastating at the same time. Katerina was talking to a friend, someone named Fair, in the conversation, and at a certain point she said, without hesitation, that marrying Renato was a matter of timing, that he was still emotionally fragile from the grief of his ex-wife, that it was the right moment to solidify the relationship before he fully recovered and started to see things more clearly. She used that exact expression, before he sees things more clearly. There was no love in those messages. There was strategy, and there was something else, a piece of information Beatrice had not expected to find, and that changed the nature of everything. Katerina knew where the girls were that night on Paulista. The driver, Rodrigo, had not disappeared by accident. He had received a call and deliberately stepped away, following instructions that came from a number Beatrice recognized as Katerina's. The girls had not gotten lost. They had been left there. Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed for a long time with that thought. Isadora and Letitia, 5 years old, alone on a sidewalk at night, crying and clinging to each other against a concrete pillar. And that had been someone's choice. Not negligence. A choice. She didn't feel immediate anger. She felt something deeper, quieter, which was almost worse. On Saturday, Katerina arrived early. Renato was home, which was rare. The girls were playing in the living room. It was one of those days that felt too normal to contain what was about to happen. Beatrice waited for the moment when the three of them were together, Renato, Katerina, and herself, and placed the paper on the living room table. "I need you to read this," she said, looking directly at Renato. Katerina recognized what it was before even seeing it. Beatrice saw it in the instant her expression changed, not with surprise, but with calculation. The question that crossed her face was not "what is this?" but "how much has he already read?" Renato picked up the paper. "Read it. Read it again." The silence that followed was different from all the other silences in that house. This one had weight and direction. "This is taken out of context," Katerina said, and her voice came out steady, almost convincing. "You don't understand how Fair and I talk. It's just a way of speaking." "Rodrigo," Renato said, without lifting his eyes from the paper. "Just the name. One word." Katerina stopped. "I called him this morning," Renato continued, now looking at her. "He answered, and he told me what happened." What came next was not a scene of shouting. Renato was not that kind of man. He folded the paper, placed it on the table with almost excessive care, and said in a voice so low that Beatrice had to pay attention to hear, "I need you to leave my house now." "Renato, you're overreacting. If you let me explain." "Now, Katerina." She stopped. "Thank you for not staying silent. Time has a quiet way of reorganizing things. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't with a declaration in the middle of the living room or a dramatic gesture that fixes everything in an instant. It happened through accumulation, in the mornings of poorly made bread and flour on the floor, in the afternoons at the park where Renato started to show up unannounced, in the nights when he stopped at the girls' bedroom door and stood there watching them sleep with an expression Beatrice could only describe as someone learning how to breathe again. The house changed temperature, not physically. The same walls, the same furniture, the same architectural silence that money can buy, but affection doesn't automatically fill. What changed was something else, more subtle. The house began to smell like food at the right times. It began to have the sound of children running down the hallway without anyone telling them to stop. It began to have drawings on the refrigerator and modeling clay on the living room carpet and conversations that lasted longer than necessary. Isadora started singing again while she showered. Beatrice noticed it on a Tuesday and stood in the hallway listening for longer than she needed to. Renato noticed other things. He noticed that Beatriz never asked for anything for herself, but defended the girls with a calm firmness that didn't need volume. He noticed that she laughed in a way that had no calculation at all. She laughed when something was funny, period. He noticed that she treated everyone in the house the same way, from the cleaning lady to the building's caretaker, and that there was a dignity in that consistency that he had stopped finding in many of the environments he frequented. On an October night, after the girls had gone to sleep, he went to the kitchen where she was organizing things for the next day and said, without beating around the bush, but also without rushing, "I would like to get to know you better. Not as an employee, as a person." Beatriz stopped what she was doing, turned to him. "You know that complicates things," she said. "I know, and that people will have opinions about it. I know that too." She stayed silent for a moment. Outside, a light rain had started without warning, the way rain has of appearing in the middle of an important conversation, as if it wants to take part. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she said. He didn't expect that. He stayed quiet for a few seconds, then sat in the kitchen chair, not in his usual spot facing the window, but in the chair beside it, the girl's chair, and said that he was afraid his daughters would grow up without good emotional memories of their father. That he sometimes woke up in the middle of the night thinking he was repeating mistakes he had promised not to repeat. That the death of the girl's mother had taken from him not only his wife, but the version of himself that knew how to be present. Beatriz listened to everything without interrupting. Then she said, "You're not the father you were before. You're the father you're learning to be now. That's different." They stayed in the kitchen talking until the rain stopped. It wasn't that night that everything was resolved, but it was that night that it truly began. In the months that followed, things were built with the calm of people who don't need to prove anything to anyone. Renato began arriving home earlier. The girls began to have a father who showed up not only physically, but with attention. Beatriz continued being who she was, without diminishing herself to fit, without transforming herself to please, without apologizing for her background or for the path she had taken to get there. There were those who frowned. There were comments from family members, from business partners, the kind of people who confuse opinion with wisdom. Renato listened to what needed to be heard and moved forward, because he had learned from his own daughters that some choices don't need external approval. They only need internal courage. On a Sunday afternoon, the four of them were at the park. Isadora ran ahead. Letitia tried to catch up. Renato held Beatriz's hand without any grand gesture, just held it, and the sun shone in that late afternoon way that makes everything feel a little slower and a little more real at the same time. Letitia tripped, fell, got up on her own, and turned back, searching with her eyes. When she saw the two of them together, she smiled the way a child smiles when the world is the way it should be, without knowing how to name it and without needing to. The lesson this story carries is not in the happy ending. It is in the path. It is in Beatriz not walking past on that sidewalk, even with her exhausted body. It is in Renato managing to listen when it mattered. It is in the girls who, without understanding anything about adults, showed with a simple word what everyone needed to see. Affection doesn't ask for a passport. It doesn't check a bank account. It doesn't ask where you came from. It only needs someone willing to stop when everyone else is walking past. If this story touched something in you, subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell in the comments what you thought and which city or country you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more people who need to hear it.